Greetings and salutations. This is the voice of Loquacious of Herd, bringing you his afterthoughts on My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, Season 7, Episode 14, titled Fame and Misfortune. I heartily suggest that you find and watch the episode itself, sans commentary, before proceeding with either this Afterthoughts review or viewing my full reaction, which is hosted at the link in the description. Please support the official release. Be warned, this Afterthoughts review will contain spoilers for the episode itself. With that out of the way, on to the review. There are occasions when, whether by chance or design, the show's timing is absolutely perfect. This episode dropping when it did, it's one of those instances of perfect timing. Specifically, it aired on a particular Saturday in August, the very Saturday when BronyCon 2017 was in full swing. And it's an episode which explores the perils and frustrations of dealing with fandoms, all from the perspective of content creators. Also, major kudos to all the congoers at BronyCon who watched it when it aired, but then took extra care not to spoil the episode for those of us who would go on to watch it later. Indeed, the only bit of information I was given, something which I don't even consider a spoiler and was glad to have, was when Epic V and Double Play both told me one thing: a name. The name. The man, the myth, the legend himself, M.A. Larson. If you're watching this video, then I would hope that M.A. Larson needs no introduction. He's one of the early writers for My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. He, along with Amy Keating-Rogers and Megan McCarthy, were what I used to call the Big Three back in the day. While they've all moved on now, their contributions to the show continue to inform and to provide the foundation for many of the excellent stories which our newer seasons and main authors produce for us. Larson is most famous in the Brony fandom as holding writing credit for Magical Mystery Cure, the episode which gave Twilight Sparkle her alicorn apotheosis. Oh, and he's also the writer behind the 100th episode, Slice of Life. When I heard his name in conjunction with Fame and Misfortune, I didn't know that Larson was going to be the credited writer for this episode, nor did I inquire more deeply. I thought perhaps he might be the writer, or perhaps it would only be something in his style, some signature thematic element of his, or, in other words, something right up his proverbial alley. As I understand it, I wound up being right on both counts. Apparently, back when he was still with the show, Larson whipped up the story idea and did some writing which was pulled out this season, given a measure of reworking. Rumor has it the changes were rather substantial, and then the script was presented with his name still on it. Given the nature and scope of those changes, though, I don't know if he's entirely pleased to have his name associated with this episode. Which would be a pity, as Fame and Misfortune is wickedly funny. A laugh-out-loud, irreverent look at fandoms in general, and, by strong implication, the Brony fandom in particular. We begin with two Earth Pony fillies, Tularula and Coconut Cream, who are having a fight. A food fight, to be precise, and one which presides a surprise banana split to Rare Find, who alas isn't voiced by Jason Thiessen this time around. Tularula and Coconut Cream are both based on a pair of G3 ponies, by the way, which may go some ways to explain their color schemes. Twilight intervenes and teaches the two fillies.
So you see, friendship isn't always easy, but there's no doubt it's worth fighting for. Aww. That sounds familiar.
That should sound familiar to Twilight, although I can't blame her for not immediately placing it, since that's a quote from the Season 2 premiere.
I'll tell you what we've learned, Discord. We've learned that friendship isn't always easy, but there's no doubt it's worth fighting for.
Thus prompted by memories of friendship lessons past, Twilight goes hunting for the old friendship journal from Season 4. She finds it, and wishes to share it with Starlight Glimmer.
Here it is. What is that? Come on, Starlight. Don't judge a book by its cover. This is the friendship journal my friends and I used to keep. It's filled with all the things we've learned, like friendship isn't always easy, but there's no doubt it's worth fighting for.
That book has seen better days. Although, given that the last time we saw it at all was back in Twilight's Kingdom, where, courtesy of Discord, the book fulfilled its grand destiny by pointing Twilight to the keys for the crystal chest, it's rather nice to know that it survived the events which leveled the Golden Oaks Library. Whether from that blast, or from having been left out in the ruins of the castle of the two sisters for a little too long, the poor thing has fallen apart. At the very least, it would need substantial repair from an archivist or a conservator. I've studied such things a bit, back when I was studying librarianship, and especially after the reveal that Applejack left an apple to rot smooshed in between the book's pages, I am quite glad there's magic available to handle what would otherwise look to be a lost cause. Starlight reads the Friendship Journal, loves it, and copies it. Which is when Twilight got an idea. She got a wonderful, awful idea. She'd make copies. Well, actually she'd have Starlight make copies.
I decided to make one for each of you.
That's amazing! A perfect copy!
I learned the spell years ago when I needed to make copies of a certain... manifesto.
I remember that manifesto. From what I recall, it shouldn't have been all that difficult to copy, but still, impressive spell. Also impressive, Starlight's character growth. It wasn't that long ago that Starlight was still rather insecure in her role as reformed villain. Mentions of her tyrannical reign made her quite distressed. Now it seems she's adopted a sort of wry humor about the whole thing. I call that progress. Ah, but what of Twilight's wonderful, awful idea?
My idea? How would you girls feel about making our journal available for every pony? If we can get these lessons into other ponies' hooves, maybe they'll benefit from them.
I think that's a great idea. I'm in! Yay!
We always said we wanted to.
Sounds fabulous.
I'm awesome! Oh yeah, good idea.
Every pony's on board with this upcoming train wreck, so time to put this plan into action. In truth, I thought it was a lovely idea. Sure, from the get-go, I immediately wondered as to what the having of the stories of their adventures published and publicly available would do for the main six individual fame, especially given the title of this episode, and knowing fandoms, I could easily see how Misfortune might result. But even so, sharing those tales, those lessons, letting others have a little peek into the lives and times of the main six and the Cutie Mark Crusaders, why, that's almost like giving the ponies of Equestria what we, the audience who watches the show, have had for these many seasons. Opportunities for enjoyment, for fun, for excitement, for adventure, for life lessons, and for sharing it all with some especially nice ponies. I approve. And not just because all of the setup from meta-humor and meta-commentary this provides. Speaking of all things meta, I know it might just be me, but the very first purveyor of the main six's tales and stories, who Twilight approaches to distribute said Friendship Journal, looks an awful lot like a Pegasus ponification of Lauren Faust herself, right down to the red hair and the red quill cutie mark. If it is, as I more than half suspect, a nod to Faust, then I approve. Kudos to her for getting Friendship is Magic up and running and laying the foundation of modern Equestria as we know it. Other booksellers acquire copies of the journal. Those copies sell like the proverbial hotcakes. And when it comes to another run-in with Tularula and Coconut Cream, the stories are having their desired effect, helping ponies with friendship so they can live happier, fuller lives. But early hints of trouble in paradise. The CMC are taking advantage of the status the Friendship Journal has garnered them to help promote their own cottage cutie mark assistance industry.
Yeah, but the purpose of the journal isn't supposed to be marketing.
Those lines, that delivery, all this coming from a cartoon which, at its core, is a means of marketing children's toys to young girls. It is very true that marketing is not the only purpose for My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Certainly, the episodes we have seen are written primarily with their eye on other foci, telling entertaining tales, offering up lessons, or just relaxing slices of life. But over it all lies the honestly not so heavy, hand of marketing. My Little Pony has good story, entertaining story, amusing story, but it's also toyetic, and there are moments in quite a few episodes which practically leap out at you shouting, "Buy our toys!" And speaking of souvenirs, enter the collectors.
Will you sign them?
Oh, I guess so. So, what did you think of the lessons?
Oh, we haven't read them. These are keepsakes. We gotta keep them in mint condition.
It has begun. Well, I should say it's picking up steam. It started with its begunning back at the beginning of this episode. The return of old lessons in a new format, the whole not judging books by their covers deal, whether literally in the case of the Friendship Journal, or perhaps figuratively in the case of not harshly judging prior generations of My Little Pony, as represented by Tula and Coconut. As I mentioned before, this is an episode about the trials and tribulations of the fandom experience, about the relationship of fandom with the authors, in a broader sense, the creators. That's a relationship that can get rocky. Especially when, as this episode takes wickedly funny pains to show us, the audience, the fans, get a bit too wrapped up in the details, the rough edges, or the peripherals, rather than the core messages and themes of that over which they are fangasming. Me? I joined the Brony fandom back in 2011. It's been over 6 years that I've been along on this glorious ride, and along the way, I've heard variations of every single one of these conversational themes.
I only wish they'd left Rarity out. She clearly doesn't belong in that book with the rest of them.
Oh, I know. Who does she think she is? Certainly she did a fine job setting up the Ponyville Days celebration, but does she really believe it was a success just because of her? The nerve!
Aw, that's too bad. Wait, that wasn't even funny. I whipped out all the Twilight Sparkle lessons because they were getting in the way of the good ones. We don't want to hear her bowling lessons. Come on, tell us again about when you met Daring Do.
Again? We want to know why Fluttershy keeps learning the same thing over and over again. Be assertive already!
Even I've learned more than she has. Why can't I be in the book?
Some ponies would argue that it doesn't seem believable that the 6 of you would be friends.
Believable?
Well, sure. I read this journal cover to cover, and I have to say, your character would have been much more interesting if she'd stayed in Canterlot.
What about Rarity? Are we really supposed to believe she learned anything she wrote in there?
That's why you gotta be Team Dash. She's the only one who didn't really need to learn anything because she was already so cool.
Twilight was better before she got wings. Fluttershy is just so painfully shy, it's hard to relate. I mean, come on.
Wait a minute, every pony.
Are Pinkie Pie and Applejack related or what?
All this is so on point. I can't help but laugh. This whole episode feels like a jab from a friend's elbow, pointing out one's own foolishness. Me? I'm a brony. More than that, I'm part of the reaction community. I am a blind reactor, and, I use the term loosely, a commentator on the show. An analyst. Inasmuch as all of those little conversational snippets are problematic, in that they can make enjoying the stories themselves harder, can make it easier to lose sight of the kindly, entertaining intentions of the show, Friendship Journal, well, I would seem to fall squarely into the realm of part of the problem. I analyze and overanalyze. I dig into history and the mythology underlaying the tales far more than the creators would ever intend. I will engage in spirited debate over the merits and foibles of various ponyfolk, world lore, or plot potentials, even when such in-depth discussions are not part of the productive discourse of simply enjoying what is presented to us, learning its overt lessons, and moving along. But all this episode's criticisms of such they-just-don't-get-it folk don't upset me. It amuses me. Because, in some measure, the writers are correct. The audience can get distracted and bogged down in minutiae. we can lose sight of the intended point. We can evenly become overly enthusiastic about things. And in doing so, we can frustrate the content creators greatly, both from some passionate measure of dislike or from our passionate attachment to someone, some pony, or something. I'm sure that more than a few of the folks who have worked on My Little Pony found their voice in Applejack's.
I'm popular, Twilight. I'm popular and I don't like it one bit.
But before we, the audience, have a negative knee-jerk reaction to this episode's calling out of the Brony fandom for our wild and crazy antics, there is something vitally important to remember. All fandoms are like this. I'll say it again. All fandoms are like this. Overenthusiastic, nitpicky, taking sides, divided loyalties, seeing unintended metaphors, missing the point of lessons, taking other lessons too much to heart, liking some characters, disliking others, arguing over who or what is best, undue curiosity at unaddressed plot points. None of this started with the Bronies. Looking back, you can see all the same phenomena with plenty of other fandoms. I'd argue that you could see it in all other fandoms in varying degrees. Me, I'm into science fiction and fantasy. The fans of Harry Potter and the Game of Thrones and the Lord of the Rings are like this. The fans of Star Wars and Star Trek are like this. The fans of Firefly and of Battlestar Galactica and of Babylon 5, shout out to my fellow lurkers, are like this. The fans of Doctor Who have been like this since our grandparents and great-grandparents were kids. The fans of Sherlock Holmes have been like this longer than anyone today has been alive. And all of this engagement, even over-engagement of fans, I think it's ultimately a good thing. It can stimulate creativity, leading to more art and music and story. It can provide added value, enjoyment, pleasure, delight. It can help broaden and deepen our understanding and appreciation of the stories, the characters, the art, which has been presented to us. Even if, maybe sometimes especially when, we, the fans, are taking it way too far, all over the place, and leaving the content creators throwing up their hooves in despair and disgust. Twilight's attempt to rally the town ponies, the town's bronies really, is to remind them that the stories they are given, and the ponies in them, are, by their very nature, imperfect and incomplete. They aren't flawless. It's a beautiful song, and I find it speaks to one of the great truths about all art and story. We love characters, we love themes, we love plots, we love shows, not just in spite of their flaws, but often because of those very flaws. Those flaws allow for relatability, for conflict, for growth, for connection. Even if we, like the town's bronies, ultimately miss the intended point. Which can leave the ones responsible for putting those stories, that art, that music, out there, feeling quite dispirited on occasion. So now, from addressing more than just our fandom, but addressing fandom in general, the episode pivots to addressing those who create art and music and story, because by now Twilight & Company, like many other content creators before them, are wondering, in light of all that nonsense, is it worth it?
Girls, I found two ponies who have something I think you should hear.
We just wanted to say thank you to all of you. Yeah, our friendship? Well, we were having trouble until we read your journal. It showed us that friends can go through all sorts of tough times and come through stronger than before. It's made us better friends than we've ever been.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I can't tell you how much it means to hear that. Thank you for telling us. We've had a tough couple of days, but knowing we've helped fillies like you,
It makes everything we've been through worth it.
Sometimes it can be easy to focus on the nitpicking, on what's wrong. Sometimes it can be harder to focus on what's right, or in the ways in which the rough edges add value to a thing. Whether as fans focusing on the objects of our fandom, or as creators looking at the fans of their own works. But actually touching some pony's life, having a positive effect, that makes it all worth it. And while at this stage in this episode, it might have been nice to have a grown pony, some pony a bit more representative of the adult end of the brony fandom, there along with Tula and Coconut when those thanks are given, I don't feel it is strictly necessary. Why, if anything, having the Phillies make that statement seems to me to say that inasmuch as we, the fans, truly take in the messages of the show, truly enjoy the stories we see, why, in that we are all young at heart. See what I did there? I took a rough edge, what some have seen as an imperfection in this episode, and looked for a way to spin it into something good. It's a thing I try to do. One of my many praises for My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic is that I often find it pretty easy to take any flaws and find something good in them. My gentle viewers, as you have doubtless noticed, I always close with a reminder that you are awesome. Not only is it true, it's one of my ways to say thank you for enjoying this delightful show, My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, and for enjoying my own small contribution to our collective fandom. It's also one of the ways I can say thank you to the many wonderful ladies, gentlemen, and those who have yet to make up their minds who work on the show, for all their hard work, their dedication, their creativity, and the wonders they produce for us. They deserve much thanks. So, thank you to all the fine folk who bring us My Little Pony. You and your work are greatly appreciated. Perhaps, at other pony gatherings, I'll even have the opportunity to express those thanks in person to a few more of you. I think I'd like that. If you wish to see my full reaction to My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, Season 7, Episode 14, titled Fame and Misfortune, the link, as I mentioned earlier, is in the description. Feel free to leave any comments or likes for that reaction here on this Afterthought review. And until next time, as always, kindly remember, y'all are awesome. Stay awesome.